Allison Tandry here with another special entry to my journal I keep in broadcast on YouTube channel DIY Salvation. I recently listened to the standalone book entitled The Sedona Method on Audiobook. Before I dig in and comment on it, I want to inform you of my biases, or what you may perceive as biases up front, so you can understand what perspective this review comes from, as there's no such thing as total objectivity when it comes to such matters. If someone came to me and asked me to recommend a spiritual study, all things being equal, I would recommend they try TROM first. If they didn't like TROM, I would recommend they study Scientology, but as a subject, outside of the church. And my third highest ranking recommendation would be the Sedona Method, but with some reservations. Your first thought may be that because I was a Scientologist more than half my life, and run a YouTube channel about TROM too, that I'm going to be biased against the Sedona Method. Now, while that thinking seems perfectly reasonable and logical, it's nonetheless false. And I can logically disprove it two ways. When I read the Resolution of Mind a Games manual, one could assume I had a Scientology bias. Decades of indoctrination that Scientology is mankind's only hope of spiritual salvation, as well as my using Scientology technology myself, and teaching it to others. Despite this, Dennis Stevens's book, as hard as it was to study, persuaded me to believe that not only are there other routes to spiritual freedom besides Scientology, but that this particular one, TROM, is actually better. If I ever found something I knew was better, or even had a chance of being better than TROM, I would stop making videos instructing and promoting TROM, and I would embrace the new practice wholeheartedly. I'd still leave my YouTube channel up, because even if I thought something was better than TROM, TROM is still a fantastic study, and worth knowing in any case. I almost wish that the Sedona Method was better than TROM or Scientology, because then I could actually make some money doing it. I could make a Sedona Method fan channel, and put links to buy Sedona Method books and courses in my video descriptions and make commissions. I could become a Sedona Method counselor, officially or unofficially. It would be much better for me on a personal and financial level to embrace the Sedona Method and teach it to others. But there's this little thing called integrity that would get in my way. The Sedona Method is actually quite good judged solely by itself. It's so good that if I had found out about the Sedona Method first, I may have never bothered with TROM. I would have never bothered trying to plow through Dennis Stevens's confusing book. I would have never bothered to do a single TROM exercise. I would have never made it my mission to clarify the subject of TROM so the masses would have a chance to learn it. I would have stopped at the Sedona Method and never looked back. There are a significant amount of TROMers who have interest in or have tried the Sedona Method. We have Pete McLaughlin with his TROMhelp.org website to thank for that. He claims the Sedona Method is some sort of introduction to level 2 of TROM, when it's not. Honestly, I wouldn't take Pete's advice on any subject, much less on TROM. You can listen to or watch my presentations about him and his TROMhelp.org website if you really want a good dose of my opinion on that. That said, there are some people who will find the Sedona Method preferable to Scientology or TROM, and I understand why that is, and I can respect that. I have no vested interest in what you practice, whether it be Scientology, TROM, the Sedona Method, or some more conventional practice like Christianity or Buddhism. To help sort out this mixed message I am making about the Sedona Method and whether or not it's right for you, as opposed to TROM, or even Scientology, I am going to ask 3 key questions at the end of my review which will help you decide. So make sure you listen to this presentation in its entirety. The first thing I'd like to say about the Sedona Method book on audio that I listened to is that the writing style irritated me to no end. I can understand how one needs to be sold, so to speak, on any new and unusual self-help or spiritual practice. I think the appropriate time and place for this is in videos advertising it, the back of the book cover, the listing on Amazon, and so on. I even think it's okay to have some selling in the introduction, and maybe even the first few chapters. But what I was treated to, non-stop, throughout the entire book right up to the very last chapter was testimonial after testimonial from this or that person who tried doing the Sedona Method and made tons of money, found love, stopped worrying about their problems, and other such claims. While this sort of writing style may appeal to some people, I'm not one of them. I consider it a major waste of my time to listen to how wonderful the Sedona method is interwoven with instruction on how to do the actual techniques. If they had specific chapters on testimonials, I would prefer that, as I would at least be able to skip those chapters. If I paid for this book, and I'm already a few chapters into it and following the instructions, I don't need to be sold on it. Many of these testimonials were subtle advertisements for their full audio course, Sedona Counseling, as well as retreats, as the testimonials were not always just about applying what this particular book was teaching, but also about the successes they had in life as a result of buying the full course or going on retreats. While I do fancy myself a capitalist, and I'd never make anyone wrong over wanting to make some money or sell their services, there's a time and place for making your sales pitch, and in my humble opinion, constantly weaving such into what I thought was just going to be an instruction manual is terribly inappropriate. If I were on the editing staff of this book prior to its publication, I would have cut this book down about 20 to 30%. But the marketing people, I am sure, would have had a word with me had I tried such a thing. Another thing that bothers me about testimonials is that it's not scientific at all. I have no idea how consistent these results are, how people made more money, improved their relationships, and all the other usual self-help buttons that self-help marketers push to get people to buy their product. Another danger about this is that when one reads these testimonials, they may use them as a false measuring stick against their own progress. In other words, one might think that they are doing things wrong or that the Sedona method doesn't work because their life did not become as much of a success as these other people's did. Lastly, on this point, I don't like the way the Sedona method is advertised. It has on the cover things like how you'll become more successful in love and money, giving you the impression that this is some sort of self-improvement program, but my take on it is that it's more of a spiritual practice. I do explain the difference between the two on my journal entry about how self-improvement and spiritual freedom are not the same thing. And my view on the Sedona method is that it's a spiritual practice that leads to greater spiritual freedom, yet it's masquerading as a self-improvement program. There's nothing wrong with self-improvement. But if I were to write a book along those lines, instead of advertising that you are going to make more money, improve your love life, and be more healthy, and then give you some mental exercises to remove your mental blocks to such, I would tell you how to start a business, give you advice on who to hire, budget your money, and so on. And to improve your love life, I'd tell you better ways to communicate with the opposite sex, and how to select a partner, and to improve your health, I would recommend a diet and exercise program. I'm bringing this up because I have read online some reviews on the Sedona method, and one of the reviewers said that although he felt happier, had peace of mind, and could think more clearly because of the Sedona method, it did not make him more money. And he said that everyone else he knew who has tried it reported the same thing. They felt happier, but they didn't get richer. And when you engage in a spiritual study, those are the things one should expect. Because life is a game, and telling people that you have a way of winning it every time against every opponent is misleading at best. Knowing what I know about the mind and spirit, I can assure you, if you try the Sedona method, you will be happier. As far as all of those other things like financial gain, for instance, it's possible to remove your mental blocks to success and still fail. It just won't bother you as much as it did when you failed before. All anyone can ever promise you along those lines is you will have a better chance, and that's it. And I do think you will have a better chance at success, but it's better to take on such spiritual practices with the aim of being happier, and if you become more successful as well, in any aspect of life, just consider it a bonus. The Sedona method, if I were to summarize it, is a system of releasing yourself of what burdens you as a spiritual being. Things like past upsets, dwelling on problems, and inner conflicts. You do this by bringing the upset or problem into view and going through a decision-making process of whether or not you could or are willing to release it. Mind you, this is releasing. It's not making the problem or upset vanish per se. Whereas practices like TROM or Dianetics make you confront your problems and upsets and diminish their strength, or in some cases even make them vanish, the Sedona method seems to be geared more towards just keeping them off of you and out of your immediate awareness. This leads me to believe that you could release something, and it could come back. And I have read a criticism or two of the Sedona method online where that very thing happens. But it's not just the online reviews that give me pause. There's a testimonial right in the book about how someone continually tried releasing something that kept coming back, and then it was finally released for good, but as a result of attending a retreat. The book alone wasn't good enough. Another little sales pitch woven into the work, and this one annoyed me more than any other. In further comparison of the Sedona method compared to TROM and Scientology, I want to introduce to the uninitiated the concept that when you release, diminish, or vanish upsets from the mind, you do need to replace it with something lest you become a vacuum for more upset either from your mind or your life. Humans tend to want to have problems. And as much as we'd like to be in a state wherein our minds are empty and totally focused in the now, that sort of state is not something you achieve overnight. So whenever you take something out of the mind, or your awareness, your focus, or however you want to put it, you need to replace it. Common to both Scientology and TROM, there are processes where you create your own mental substance to replace what you've lost, and also processes where you simply get more in touch with your environment. So even if you can't replace what you've lost with a mental creation, you can at least fill the void with physical substance in your environment. Since the Sedona method, at least as far as what I've read in this book, doesn't seem to have such processes, it does make sense to me that people could release things and then they come back. Or they could release on things and just replace what they release with some other problem or upset. I can see why the Sedona method is so popular. I'll never forget watching one of their promotional videos where they took people on stage and had them release right then and there. The materials, at least the book I listened to, are very easy studying. I don't recall having to crack open a dictionary more than a few times during my study. The Sedona method has a community. They have professional services. The organization does not have any sort of bad reputation like the Church of Scientology does. So the Sedona method wins as far as accessibility, as well as it being socially acceptable, that is to say, they haven't ruined themselves with a series of scandals and abusive behavior, and I don't imagine they ever will. They do seem like well-intentioned people who practice what they preach. I agree with a lot of Sedona method theory. And a major reason why I do is because it's mostly Scientology theory, just with a different technique applied to it. Now TROM also has its roots in Scientology, and the techniques are similar, as you would expect. Some accuse TROM of being repackaged Scientology, even though that's kind of like calling a jet a repackaged biplane. I wouldn't call the Sedona method repackaged Scientology. It's more like Scientology watered down. And to the credit of TROM, Dennis Stevens didn't hide the fact that most of what he learned about the mind and spirit came from L. Ron Hubbard's works. But in the entire time I listened to the Sedona method on audiobook, I did not hear Hubbard's name or Scientology mentioned once. But I sure heard a lot of Scientology theory, some of it with a little twist, some of it repeated verbatim. Maybe they were just afraid of getting sued by the Church of Scientology, or maybe they just didn't want to be associated with Scientology on any level, and considering the Church of Scientology's terrible press, I can to some degree understand. But no matter what you may think of the subject of Scientology or the Church itself, Hubbard should be given some credit for what the Sedona method is based on, and if these guys can't give him proper credit in their book, I am at least going to give Hubbard credit here. The Sedona method has obvious, deep roots in Scientology, and anyone who has studied Scientology beyond just reading a few pages of Dianetics will easily be able to spot such roots when learning the Sedona method. It's terribly obvious. The Sedona method will have an appeal to people who are not ready to face what horrors they believe to be in their minds. It's also easy reading. And there is a support system, and although I have not looked at the actual price list, I am certain that the Sedona method is nowhere near as expensive as Scientology is if you decide to get professional services like individual counseling or retreats. I'm going to end off with my 3 questions as I mentioned earlier in this review. So, ask yourself, Do you have the courage to confront whatever may be in your mind, and do such solo? Are you willing to do some real studying? Are you willing to make a commitment to fully resolving your mind, whatever it may take? If you answered yes to all three, then never mind the Sedona method. Do TROM. You'll make a full resolution of your mind, as opposed to just keeping your problems, upsets and inner conflicts off of you by releasing them. If you don't have the courage, or you are averse to studying, and would rather not make a commitment, the Sedona method may be just right for you, especially if you want the hand-holding of professional services without having to pay the outrageous amounts of money the Church of Scientology asks for. As for me, I'm sticking with my TROM, thank you very much. This has been a special entry of Allison's audio journal on the YouTube channel DIY Salvation. Don't just use your mind. Resolve it.